the prison break, as you rightly describe it, even those borders are artificial in that the real armistice, the 1949 armistice line, actually encompasses those kibbutzes where they went. That that entire area that they call the Gaza envelope was actually, I think it's about a total of close to 400 square kilometers. That was supposed to be part of the 1949 armistice line between the newly created Israel and Gaza. But Israel decided they needed a buffer zone, and so they took that, and then they ended up colonizing that buffer zone. And so there is a new so-called artificial border. And when they broke out, they actually that's where they broke out into a region that was supposed to be Gaza anyway. So I mean that's a side note, and maybe it's not important. It is important to me. It's important to Palestinians. Palestinians, most of them are actually their original villages are in those areas that are colonized right now. And the other point I want to make regarding civilians, um, everybody refers to the people at Nova as kids and civilians. That's fine, even though they, by virtue of their age, they were all either active military or reserve military by virtue of their age, because there's mandatory conscription in Israel, as you know. And and yet the 3,000 plus Lebanese are not considered civilians because they weren't in uniform either. I mean, the argument for why the people at Nova were civilians is because they were out having fun, they were dancing, and they weren't in uniform. And yet the families and the people and the children even in who were mutilated or killed in Lebanon are considered Hezbollah, right? Even though they were with their families. So, I want to point that out too, because who gets to be called a civilian and who isn't?
Although I would say that just in fair, I mean, I think that that's true of the media and the Western media, and certainly of most people. I mean, I even have friends who I'm shocked by this. Friends who have said, "Well, I don't like everything that Israel does, but I thought that that thing with the pager attack was good." And I'm like, "Wait, Leon Panetta, like he's not a peacenik and a bleeding heart liberal. Leon Panetta, former CIA head, called this terrorism." But what I was going to say is that I think everyone on this, the three of us, and I'm sure almost everyone watching, unless people are hate watching, would agree that, don't have that double standard. But
Of
that double
course,
standard is,
yeah.
of course, I mean, baked into so much coverage, and it's so baked into it that we don't even question it. So I actually think it's good that you reminded people of that, Susan, because every time, for instance, every time the this is described as a war, I think it was Norman Finkelstein who made this point, but I'm sure many have since, or maybe at the same time or before. But every time it's described as a war, it's kind of a PR boon for Israel, because they're letting that's what Israel wants to frame this as a war, as opposed to a genocide. And I know that both of you have called this a genocide.
This day is clearly consequential. World order potentially changing a day. And I don't think it's enough for us to have just a sense of what happened. I think it's important for us to know um, exactly what happened as much as possible. Was there a stand down order? Why did it take them so long to respond? Did they know this was going to happen?
I just wanted to respond to two questions that Susan raised. One is, did the Israelis know about this? And number two, why were they so slow to react? And why did they react in such a ham fisted way? Uh, it's very important, just to get started here, to remember that this is the second time in my lifetime that Israel has been the victim of a surprise attack. Two of the great surprise attacks in military history involved the Israelis. The first one was 1973, the Yom Kippur War. And the second one was here on October 7th. Now, in both cases, the Israelis were caught completely by surprise. I don't think in 1973, and from all the evidence I've seen here, that the Israelis saw this one coming. There's no question in both cases that there were people down at the lower levels who saw it coming. But as that information filtered up, it was disregarded. And I think what happened in both cases is that the Israelis had complete contempt. In 73, it was for the Egyptians. And on October 7th, it was for the Palestinians. They had complete contempt for their adversary, and they thought there was no way that their adversary would be foolish enough to attack them. So they were caught completely by surprise. And related to that, they didn't have contingency plans. It's not like they were expecting an attack any day and they were just sitting back waiting for it to happen. And then they responded in a very rational, legal way. And I know a great deal from way back when about the 1973 war. And if you look at the initial Israeli responses to the Egyptian crossing of the canal, uh, it was a total mess from an Israeli perspective. They were really caught with their pants down and they were really flailing around. And it took them quite a while to get their bearings. And then, of course, Ariel Sharon crossed the Suez Canal and they ended up defeating the Egyptians on the ground. But anyway, I would just say that looking at what happened on October 7th, the Israelis were caught by surprise. They didn't see it coming, and I think that their response was haphazard. And I think, by the way, that gets back to an earlier point I made. That's why they brought in all that firepower and just turned the firepower loose. That is invariably your first reaction when you get caught with your pants down like that. Bring in the firepower, turn the Apaches loose, and that is indeed what happened.
You might be absolutely right. I mean, that's a plausible explanation, but I think we deserve an investigation to know for sure. I mean, because there have been some Israeli military personnel and analysts who were basically told to stand down, who to maybe, and it could have been that they just, like you said, they had such contempt for Palestinian agency that they were like, yeah, whatever, this is just, they're just doing whatever Palestinians do. That's also possible. I just think we need an investigation. And I love that you mentioned the 73 Yom Kippur War, because that was really the first time. I mean, it's what led to the Camp David Accords ultimately, because for the first time, Israel actually felt threatened. They felt like, they can't just bully their way um, through against Egypt, and so they were forced to make peace with Egypt because of that, because they felt threatened.
Just Susan and Katie, just very quickly, after the 73 war, there was a commission that was set up to investigate what happened. As I remember, it was the Agronaut Commission report, which, as I remember, talked about the conception that the Israelis had in their head. And the conception was, in part, contempt for the Egyptians and the belief that there was no way they would ever launch an attack. But anyway, the Netanyahu government has gone to great lengths to make sure that there's not a commission set up to study what happened on October 7th, because we know who's going to be blamed for what happened, who's going to, bear the principal responsibility. We know where the buck stops in this case. And therefore, Netanyahu doesn't want that investigation. And in fact, he wants to continue this war, not only so there's no investigation set up, but so that he can produce a great victory. I believe this is all a mirage, by the way, but he wants to produce a great victory so that when the day comes that they have this national commission set up, something akin to the Agronaut Commission report, he can say, okay, I goofed then, but in the end, I produced this great victory for Israel.
Maybe I can just briefly touch on the something that I mentioned earlier about the death toll. When I was in Gaza, it was immediately clear to me that there was an underestimation of the true numbers. I mean, that was just off the bat in the hospitals. And I spoke with several doctors there to try and understand what's the criteria for marking somebody as a martyr, because there were several people who came in and died and they were not being marked as martyrs. And so the information that I gathered when I was there is that there are very narrow criteria to mark someone as part of the official death toll. and it includes number one, death by direct fire. Not even if they like get an injury that gets infected and they die later from that infection from the injury, they're not counted among the martyrs. So it's death by direct fire. It is complete identification, name, full rubai name, like the four-part name of the deceased, and their civil ID number. So if a body comes in and it has clearly the person has clearly died by direct fire, but they can't identify that person, they're not counted. So the criteria is already like extremely narrow. So that number, that 60 some plus thousand, is already just a fraction of the people that they know are dead. And then there were people, and people I know, who buried loved ones, especially people in the north before the ceasefire, who could not get to hospitals. And also, so that's the other part of the criteria, is that only the people who go through the official hospital channels are counted. So people were getting killed and dying and getting buried by their loved ones, in local cemeteries without ever going through the system. And that was tens of thousands of people at least. And then, of course, you have whole populations with chronic illnesses who cannot access medications and who were dying for lack of access to dialysis, lack of access to blood pressure meds, to lack of access to insulin for diabetes, or vasodilators for asthma and other lung diseases. And so there was this whole population who were dying but not being counted as martyrs in that official number because it was not direct fire. There were children who were dying of heart attacks from fear. Children as young as 5 years old, from their hearts stopped beating because they're that terrified, and they weren't being counted. There were bodies that came in that were, again, unidentifiable, that weren't being counted. And then, of course, you have hundreds of thousands of people that are under the rubble. And again, because there's no way to bring them through this official hospital channel of identification and so forth, that they don't get counted. And there are scientific ways to estimate the number. I did that. The Lancet did it. And even, recently, the retired General Havel, the Israeli general, I think he even said that we've killed at least 200,000 people. And most recently, I think the estimate was 680,000 people killed. And I think that was done by two Australian scholars. There was a study. And I think this is really important, because I think we need to stop repeating this number of 60,000, because it is a gross underestimation. It is, the death toll is in the hundreds of thousands, and I think it's at least 500,000 people who have been killed by Israel. And that doesn't even include all the diseases that people have now. I mean, we heard it from Dr. Daoud in the first segment, but I saw it with my own eyes. Like, hepatitis was rampant. Everybody got it. That was the thing I was scared about, was just getting hepatitis. And there's all kinds of diseases, lung diseases, that are happening because people are inhaling all manner of chemicals and strange things, and just all kinds of toxins. And of course, the lack of nutrition, the infections, the scabies, the skin diseases, and also the stunted growth and stunted development of children. I mean, this is something that is going to affect us for generations. It's total devastation. And I think if it were happening to anyone else in the world, certainly if it were happening to Israelis, it would have never happened. It would have been stopped.